you're up in Montreal now, and that adjustment. A lot of people talk about the organization. It's great, but you got to deal with the media. You got to deal with the French media and the English media and all the bullshit that goes along with it. That I absolutely love playing there. I love the fan base. The electricity in that building's unbelievable. Looking at that, how was that? The beginning, I guess, and your time there was fun for you. You fucking had a successful time in Montreal, no question about it. What were some of the drawbacks though? If you're telling someone they're going to Montreal, what are you telling them? Say, hey, watch out for this.
Yeah, there's so much turnover. It was like players, coaches, staff, GMs. I just had my first couple of years, I had like three GMs and three coaches. And it seemed like every year you're getting a new fourth line and then you're trading a couple guys here and there. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but it was like really hard for me to come from college where you're just like, you're a family, right? Like you can't trade a guy in college. Like this is our team. This
Yeah.
is set in stone. And you'll block a shot for the guy next to you and he'll block it for you. And then you get to the pros and you're like, well, that guy might eat a puck and then I could get a couple more minutes every now and then. And that for me was the biggest adjustment. And that's not geared towards Montreal. I think maybe a little bit of like the turnover was with you get to know a coach and then the next year he gets fired. And it just, I think when I look back on my time in Montreal, I think if you handle the negatives and kind of turn them into a positive, you're going to be better off in your career for it. I mean, you always have someone holding you accountable. You play bad that game, fans let you have it, media lets you have it. You go back to your house at night, you just turn on any channel and they're talking about you. and so many people view it as a negative. And listen, it's easy to do so. There are times when you're sitting there like, geez, can you just lay off me? And it's like, at the end of the day, though, like if you handle that the right way, if you say, I got to have a good game tomorrow. No matter what, I got to do what's right to have a good game tomorrow. And I found myself in that position a lot. Maybe my wife wasn't too happy with how pleasant I was when I was, getting some of the heat because I was just so dialed in. Like, I could get traded if I go a couple more games here without scoring a goal, or they're really going to come down on me. But I seem to always have found a way to dig myself out of that by, really bearing down and making sure that, I had that good game or I scored that big goal up until my last year where I had it was a really tough year for our team, for our organization, for everybody. And I was really proud of everything that I accomplished there in terms of that, except for my last year, it got away from me. But I watched last night that documentary about Patrick Waugh and Claude Lemieux, and it was no different from him. I felt like he was talking to me through the TV screen about what happened, and it seems like a lot of people, most players that have been there for a long time, kind of go through that, and at the end of the day, you can be a better player because of it if you just tackle it and handle it the right way.
But that's the pressure that you talk about playing in Montreal. A lot of people say, oh, what pressure? The pressure.
Yeah.
Well, the pressure of being held accountable at every turn. And that pressure, how you deal with it. And looking at the way you dealt with it, come on, 6 times scored 30 goals. I mean, who does that there in this day and age? So you certainly, looking back on it, dealt with it good. And I look at, when you talk about being naive to what pro hockey was at the beginning, can't help but blame you. I was naive, I know, when I started, but when you talk about the tumultuous start, when, Bob Gainey, then Gauthier, and then Bergevin, this coach, that coach, that is not a great way to start. You need that stability, and certainly battling through that and then doing what you did as far as scoring goals. That's awesome. Yeah, and you did prove it. And I think fans always wanted more because you're a big guy. Everybody thought you should be more physical, this and that. That is not your game. You're that power forward, drive that puck, drive the net, get that quick shot away, all those things. I think people weren't at times happy with that. They thought there should have been more there. When you weren't scoring, well, they wanted you to do something else. And I think that was unfair. There were even times I thought that way, Max.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was looking back, unfair in that sense, because that wasn't your game. That isn't your game. And you certainly stepped up to the plate when called upon. And every scorer goes through that shit. They go through their difficult times where they're slumping. But a lot of them don't have to deal with what you have to deal with in Montreal when it comes to that.
Yeah, I always thought that was so funny. It's like people think I'm so much bigger than I am. I'm 6'1". Everyone thinks I'm like 6'6". I should be bashing guys' heads through the glass. I'm like, no, like you go try and hit 10 people and then try and, skate wide around. It's just impossible to play that way, especially 82 games,
Yeah.
especially 15 years, especially, maintain that and stay injury free. It's funny because Pete DeBoer, probably the best coach I had to date in terms of like getting the best out of me. And he's like, I always notice, like, I look at the score sheet when you have a bad first period or bad first couple of shifts and you have like 5-6 hits. Like we don't need you just running around like an idiot. Like your job is to score goals and create offense. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so relieving to hear. Like it's so ingrained to me that it's like, okay, if you're not scoring, you got to make a name for yourself. Go run someone. And listen, there is a time and place for that, especially in the playoffs. But it's like, don't run yourself out of position when your job is to create offense. I mean, it's like I said, it's so hard to do all that at once. And at the end of the day, I'm paid to score goals and create offense.
Yeah.
I'm not getting any more money. I'm not, I'm not going to go into free agency and they're going to be like, well, you had this many hits. I mean, I get it. It is a nice little bonus and icing on the cake to play physical. And there are times where I should add it more and sometimes where I should scale it back. But I look back at my days just like you in Montreal, and it was just like constantly like, oh, why aren't you just crushing everyone and this and that? Hey, I stayed true to myself and I made a nice little career out of what I do best. And hey, no player is perfect. You can find something on every player in the league that they can do better.
Yeah.
And if it's at times me being a little bit more physical, yeah, definitely. But there are times where I am very physical and like I said, Pete DeBoer didn't think that was the best for me.
How was DeBoer as a coach?
He's a very good coach. He's systematically, I don't think there's anyone in the league like him. I mean, you knew exactly where to be at all areas of the ice. Our D zone structure was flawless. Everyone would just, the second he came in, there was no confusion. You knew exactly where to be at all times. And that's why, minus last year, he gets you right there. He gives you an opportunity to win it all because of that structure.
So Maxie, the Montreal time, and we got to talk about this. And we look at Bergevin comes in, and here's a new GM. Never, he was in Chicago. He's a scout, advanced scout, assistant GM. Held all them jobs and kind of learned the ropes. And then he gets an opportunity in Montreal. Comes in. What was it like when he came in the first time around? Because boy, I got this feeling with Berg. He obviously an emotional guy, but a guy that he really wanted to protect the players that were there. I often felt that he wanted to keep you guys from having to live up to the tradition and the past of that organization. This is the feeling I got. He didn't want any of the older guys. And it's not that I had to be there or Guy Lafleur had to be there or this one had to be there, but that was something that organization always prided themselves on. When I was coming up there, I saw Dickie Moore, Jean Beliveau, all of them, the Rocket Rashad, Henry Rashad, they'd always come in the room and talk to the guys. And it was awesome. It was awesome. That went away. And I always got the feeling that Bergevin was so, worried about players having to live up to that he kind of tried to protect his team. Any truth to that?
I've never thought of it that way. I think that makes sense. He's when Berge first came in, I think it was his passion that everyone was kind of drawn towards. Like he was a fiery guy. Would get, like you said, really emotional. You've seen him cry a bunch of times. You see him fired up a bunch of times. I didn't know anything other than what my time was there, because I think before he came, I was too young to even really have a relationship with any of the ex-players other than yourself. And even if he did feel that way, it didn't stop me. I've always had a really good relationship with all the alumni. I mean, I remember a couple of times Guy Lafleur came out publicly about me, but then after that, I mean, up till the end, him and I would text him often. He was like a guy that I talked to a lot about stuff, golf tournaments. I started living there in the summer. I started to get to know you guys a little bit more. Spend some time with Serge Savard. I, if he felt that way, it didn't stop me at all from having relationships with you guys, and I learned just so much from I guess the experiences that the alumni had in the past. And I know it was a different league. I know, it's a different sport now. It's a lot more, I guess, individual, and guys are getting paid more. So you're gonna have your own routines, your personal trainers, your chefs, this and that. But at the end of the day, you look at the teams that win, and you look when they pick up the cup. They have that camaraderie that all your teams had back in Montreal, and that was the number one thing that I learned. You guys are brothers for life, and that's the big reason why I'm chasing this ultimate goal, is because I want to have that special feeling and that bond for life.
The only question I had going back, I guess, not to go back, but like that pressure in Montreal, like when you became a captain, like did that amplify that too? I mean, was like, how did that feel like right away? Or like, did you feel like the pressure of the media was like even amplified more? Did you were there times where you're like, shit, this sucks being the captain? Not that you're going to say that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, did that just kind of make it worse?
Big responsibility.
Yeah.
Right?
I've heard people mention that to me, and like, oh, you couldn't deal with being captain. And no, I've always been a person that like thrived. And like I said, what we talked about being in the past, that thrives under like being held accountable. And I was always often my best version of myself when my dad was hard on me. So when I was a captain, I just took it so serious. I took it so seriously. Not to say that I didn't before, but I was just on a whole nother level of, I have to do this the right way. I have to make sure that I'm ready for tomorrow, because I've had a couple bad games and they'll really come down on me. I just amplified everything to a whole nother level. And whether that, away from the rink, that could have shown to people around me that I was, under that scrutiny, and maybe I was a little bit on edge a little bit. But when it came to being on the ice, I just, I would do whatever it took to kind of get the best out of myself in that situation. And the one thing that I'm really proud of is I always stood in front of those cameras and always held myself accountable, whether it's deserved or not. And oftentimes I'd come home and my wife would be like, why are you just throwing yourself under the bus? And I'm like, you know what? You're right. I got to stop doing that. But at the same time, I'm talking for 30 minutes pregame skate. I'm talking 30 minutes postgame skate. And you're catching, the 5 seconds where I've got asked for the third time why you haven't scored 3 or 4 games. And I see why it would come off this way. And I see why fans could see why it was a bit on edge. But what about the other, 57 minutes where I was talking about how I believed in this team, and we have confidence in this room, and that's just the way it's going to go. And it's going to go that way as long as there's 30 media members in the locker room after every skate, and that'll never change. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud with how I handled that, and no one can ever take that away from me.